Good morning, guys. It is Thursday, January the 23rd, and we've got a major winter storm on our hands. It's something you probably heard on your local network recently, how big of an event this is, and you've probably heard the word historic thrown around quite a bit. But either way, we're going to have a lot of snow in some places, a lot of ice. And the dangerous part about it all is that we have really cold air coming in behind it. A lot of you that experience snow and ice in the south, places like Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, it's not out of the ordinary for you guys to get snow and ice. The problem is that usually you have it gone the next day. You don't see it staying 1 to possibly 3 days after an event. And that's what really is going to make this, I think, quote unquote historic, is that, yeah, you've got cold air moving in behind the system. Another thing here is that you've got a very large area being affected from Texas to Maine, basically. And this could not only, affect air travel, but it's going to affect the roadways. And one of the major problems, too, with temperatures dropping into the single digits is that not only could people lose power, but they could have their pipes burst. And it's going to make it really hard for people to help each other in this situation where, power companies are trying to restore power in some of these places. Traveling on back roads that are still covered in ice 1-2 days after the storm. And I just imagine everything that could go into a scenario where, yeah, you do get an inch of ice and you have people that are stuck, more or less, and they don't have what they need in preparation for the storm. So part of my reason for getting this video out, and hopefully it will be helpful to those affected by the storm, is just maybe to have the motivation to be prepared for an event like this. So let's go ahead and get started and kind of go over the timing of the snowfall and the ice, and even some of the thunderstorm activity over the southeast. Now, this is using polarweather.com. This is probably one of the best websites to use in terms of looking at snowfall, looking at rainfall. One of the advantages of it is that you can go and look at the European model and say, okay, how much snowfall is it actually showing? That's one thing you're not going to necessarily get from a website like Tropical Tidbits. So one of my favorite features about this website I felt like sharing with you guys. Now, this is the European model. This is probably the most accurate model that we can use for a storm like this. And what it's showing is that, yeah, we've got snowfall overspreading the central plains during the day Friday, especially as we get into Friday evening, Friday night. And further to the south, we have over the southern plains both rain and freezing rain. What's going to be interesting is determining, okay, where is the sleet set up? And there will probably be an area of sleet over northern Texas that develops, not only in the pink area, but part of the blue area here, basically over central Oklahoma as well. And the good thing about having sleet is that it will cut down on that freezing rain total, or the potential of freezing rain in this region. Now, as we move forward in time, let's go ahead and clear this up a little bit. We can see the freezing rain line dropping into central Texas as we get into, let's say, Saturday morning. It looks like the Red River is going to be probably a transition zone between that freezing rain and sleet, especially as we head towards mid-morning Saturday. And then you can really see how the snow is getting going over northern portions of Oklahoma, northern portions of Arkansas, as we get towards maybe 10 a.m. Saturday morning. And we have likely either heavy sleet, again, I imagine maybe over southern Oklahoma, northern portions of Arkansas. There's probably going to be a good deal of sleet working into the system at this time. What we're going to have probably near the Dallas-Fort Worth area is freezing rain, extending into, let's say, southern portions of Arkansas. And then below that even, we have showers coming up out of the Gulf. And that will likely be the case for Houston for the duration of this event. I don't see you guys really getting any freezing rain that far to the south. Now as we move forward in time, again, we can see the snowfall actually overspread Missouri. Heavy snowfall really over Kentucky. And this could extend into Cincinnati as well. And of course, we see snowfall extending as far north as northern Illinois, northern Indiana, northern Ohio. But we're now seeing heavy snowfall over the southern portions of each one of those states. And again, this is probably a big change for your local forecast in the last 48 hours. It's gone from light snow amounts to possibly a foot of snow in a place like Cincinnati, Ohio, or Louisville, Kentucky. One thing I want to point out here is that as we get into Saturday evening, you can see where the freezing rain is likely over northern Louisiana, northwestern portions of Mississippi, and this is heavy precipitation at this time. So we could see easily a half an inch of freezing rain during this period Saturday night across eastern Texas, northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas, maybe into, again, northern Mississippi, and maybe even southern Tennessee. And then as we move forward from there, again, snow begins to overspread Virginia as we get into Sunday morning between maybe 1 and 4 a.m. One thing that's also a big change from before is looking at the Carolinas. Again, we see pink over the Carolinas and northern Georgia, but it's really light. So if we look at this area here, yeah, there's frozen precipitation, but we're talking about freezing drizzle, a little bit of freezing rain on the lighter side here for the Carolinas. A lot of the forcing here in terms of the heavy precipitation as we move towards, let's say, between 4 and 6 a.m. in the morning is going to be up against the western front of the Appalachians. There's going to be a huge temperature gradient there, both aloft and at the surface. And you're going to have a lot of moisture and warm air overrunning the cold air in that region. So there's going to be a lot of forcing there in the Tennessee Valley and the Ohio Valley. More or less, you're going to see a lot of the heavier precipitation in that same region. One thing I want to point out, too, is that freezing line in Virginia is going to quickly move to the north, at least aloft in the atmosphere. Places like Stanton to possibly Winchester, Virginia, could see a longer duration of snowfall. So there will be an area there along I-81 that probably picks up still maybe 8 to 12 inches of snowfall. But as soon as you go across the mountain chain, let's say the Blue Ridge mountain chain towards Charlottesville, you're going to see those snowfall totals really drop off. And especially as you head south to, let's say, Richmond or let's say Lynchburg, Virginia, you're going to see a lot more sleet to the south. And then eventually as you get into North Carolina, it's going to probably be mostly freezing rain from Sunday morning through the duration of the event itself. I think that could be an area for a lot of freezing rain accumulating on trees, western North Carolina, western South Carolina, into the northern Piedmont of North Carolina, places like Greensboro, Winston-Salem. Those are the prime locations I would see as getting a lot of freezing rain from this event. Also, again, as we look back over eastern Arkansas, eastern Texas, northern Louisiana, northwestern Mississippi, western Tennessee, western Kentucky, this area could potentially either get sleet or freezing rain. If this is indeed freezing rain, again, this would be piling up over a 12 to 18 hour period. And that would lead to tremendous amounts of freezing rain. Again, some models are showing 1 to 2 inches of freezing rain. I think it's going to be closer to maybe an inch of freezing rain with sleet mixing in as that storm tracks off to the east. Now, historically speaking, with these systems as they track off to the east, during the development of the low pressure system, and when we say that, it's when it becomes closed off, more or less, we have something called cyclogenesis. And there's usually to the east or to the northeast quadrant of that low pressure system, we have something called frontogenesis. we're going to have strong forcing probably in that area, not only created by the orographic lifting against the Appalachian Mountains, but just when the cyclone itself first forms, there's a great deal of energy. And I could see some heavy rain through the Tennessee Valley, extending up into Kentucky, Southwest Virginia. So we're talking about maybe an inch or two of rain, like we were seeing in the models. It would just be in the form of rain instead of freezing rain. And what could also happen is that we could get a few strong thunderstorms. So you could be experiencing, instead of the icing event that was talked about days ago, thunderstorm activity over central Alabama. And we could see some of that warmer air in the 50s start to move into central Alabama as we get into Sunday afternoon. Another thing I want to point out here is that even though it's not showing sleet over Virginia at this time, we can see that this area here is likely going to be cold enough to support sleet. And I would say that we're going to probably see a sleet storm in central Virginia during Sunday afternoon, more so than any freezing rain accumulation. However, further to the south, I would not put it past this all being freezing rain here in western North Carolina and northern portions of the Piedmont area. Again, I think this is a prime area for getting an inch of freezing rain. Now, further to the west, again, we still have freezing rain extended into eastern Texas, through parts of Mississippi, Tennessee, and West Virginia. Again, this is an area that could easily pick up a half an inch to an inch of freezing rain. As that low tracks further to the east, we still have frozen precipitation due to the cold air damming on the eastern side of the Appalachians over North Carolina, over Virginia. The snow has moved into the northeast. And let's kind of back up a little bit here. It looks like the heaviest snowfall will be moving into the D.C. area, likely around 7 a.m. in the morning. And that includes Baltimore, Maryland. As we move forward in time, it looks like New York City is going to get into the heavy snowfall maybe around 10 a.m. And beyond that, it looks like you're going to have several hours, maybe a 6-hour period of heavy snow over New York City. And again, with those snow ratios, why not a foot of snow? You could easily get that with this system. And it looks like a foot of snow is possible through much of the northeast here, especially if the system overperforms beyond what we're seeing here. By the time we get to Sunday afternoon, like towards 4 or 5 p.m., we have a low pressure system that's now formed off of the Delmarva Peninsula. And that's going to bring in more Atlantic moisture because of that closed low there. And if you look towards Canada here, north of Maine, you can see where we have high pressure in place. There's kind of like this squeeze effect going on in the northeast, and that's just going to bring in more of that Atlantic moisture. And this is going to be a long duration event. We can see where it's just lasting hour after hour. And by 10 p.m. Sunday night, we're still receiving light to moderate snow over the Adirondacks, over the Berkshire Mountains, over the White Mountains in the northeast. And lighter snow still over the Capital District in Albany. And this extends eastward into Boston. As far as Boston receiving heavy snow, it looks like you guys could receive either a 9 to 12 hour period of moderate to heavy snow. So again, I think it's entirely possible that Boston receives a foot of snow even from this event. Now, once the system is out of here, we're going to have a lot of cold air. We're going to have a big trough extending down over the East Coast. And we're going to have continuous shots of cold air coming up after the system moves off the coast. So one of the biggest changes we saw recently in the model runs is the warm air and heavy rain moving into Kentucky, even parts of West Virginia. And it's really cutting down on those snowfall totals as we get into Sunday morning. And this is as of about 4 a.m. Sunday morning. You can see where over much of Tennessee, northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, northern Georgia, all of this precipitation is in the form of rainfall. And that's going to really begin to wash away some of that freezing rain, sleet and snow that's accumulated over the region. And that's going to be a good thing for many people that live there. The ones that wanted snow and ice, though, that's going to affect the totals for you guys. However, further off to the east, we can see where that freezing rain is over North Georgia, extending into the Appalachians of South Carolina and North Carolina. And further north still, probably sleet over southern Virginia and heavy snow over central Virginia. And of course, on the back side of this, we have all snow as you get into northwestern Arkansas, northern Kentucky, and so forth. Now, this is the 18Z run of the European model. Let's compare that to the GFS model. And one of the good things that the GFS model does, and I think it doesn't get enough credit for, is that it's able to do a good job showing where the sleet will likely occur. Now, in general, it's also a very cold model, so even though we're seeing sleet down into South Carolina, I think there will be an area of sleet into North Carolina initially, but that will likely rapidly change to freezing rain as we get towards Sunday afternoon. What's also interesting, though, is that that sleet line goes into Tennessee, Arkansas, eastern Texas, and this could end up being a very good thing. Even though I say there is a good possibility of a ½ an inch to an inch of freezing rain across all these areas that were mentioned before, there is also the potential that that cold air dome associated with the high pressure is stronger than we realize. And that makes that cold air column much thicker for all these areas, and we could see sleet versus freezing rain in many locations. And that would really help us moving forward in the south. Sleet, snow, much easier to deal with on the roadways, much easier to deal with in terms of keeping our power, right? But yeah, this would really help us if that were to be the case. Some would argue, well, now we're going to get more freezing rain to the south. Not necessarily. I think what could end up happening is that the models were not able to pick up on the amount of sleet that was going to occur. It's just something it's not good at doing, especially when we look at the European model versus the GFS model. Okay, so one thing I want to show here is that, yeah, the big difference here between the two models, even though they do share a lot in common now in the latest run, is that there's a much larger extent of that warm air into Kentucky, into West Virginia, and back through Southwest Virginia and Tennessee. So we don't see that in the GFS run. Again, it's supporting colder air from the high pressure system to the north. And with that deeper column of colder air, we're not expecting rainfall, according to the GFS, over much of Tennessee, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And just to show you once again, there's the comparison, just to show you the difference. Everything else is pretty much lining up in terms of mid-Atlantic, again, snow and sleet over Virginia, freezing rain extending into North Carolina, South Carolina, and possibly North Georgia. And again, of course, sleet and freezing rain and eventually snow on the back side of the low pressure system. All right, so the next thing I want to show here is the trend in the European model and how it's trended north with time. Okay, so the next thing I want to show here is the trend in the European model, and you can see the storm has shifted to the north with time. And we've seen that potential for snowfall even over eastern Virginia, Hampton Roads region, now transition to rain with time. And that warm nose of air is just moving further and further north. And we're seeing changes from snow and ice over Tennessee and Kentucky to a chance of rain in those same locations. Now, will this further trend to the north with time? I think we've reached our limit in terms of that system moving to the north. And we're now seeing the GFS and European align a lot more. I think the biggest change we could see moving forward is whether or not we see sleet versus freezing rain in many of these locations that are of concern. Southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana, eastern Texas into western Tennessee, parts of Kentucky. Also over North Carolina, is it a thick enough dome of. Now the biggest change in the last 48 hours has been the location of that low pressure system over Tennessee. And why has it formed there, and why do we have that warm nose of air in place? The biggest change has been aloft. And if we go back to Sunday, again, preparing for a forecast on Monday morning, one of the big differences I see in the model is the short wave and its position over the Baja of California. Now, if we look at the position of the trough, the parent trough really, over the Great Lakes in the Midwest region, you'll notice that these two things are disconnected. And with it, we actually have the direction of the winds. Let's see if we can put that in a different color here. Hopefully this is visible to you guys. But a general west to east flow was around these two areas of energy. And what this allows for is the system just to move west to east, and we really just have precipitation overrunning the cold air. And when we were forecasting this system, it was a high pressure driven system with some moisture driven by the short wave out of the Pacific and also the Gulf of Mexico. And this system would have just exited, really no north to south movement involved in it. However, as we move forward in time, the model showed that these two, the short wave and the parent trough, actually phase together east of the Rockies. Try to show that here on the figure to the right. And one thing we noticed too along with that is that the direction of the winds was more out of the southwest. So now you have this energy coming off the Pacific and likely off of the Gulf of Mexico. And with wind coming from the source regions, we're now going to have warmer air working into the system. Now for you weather enthusiasts out there, one thing that's really interesting when you look at a trough in a neutral phase like we have in this figure to the right is that on the back side of it, if you see winds directly out of the north, and usually we'll look at like the jet stream winds instead of a figure like this. And again, this is like the 500 millibar anomaly. But if you were to look at another image with the jet stream and you see those winds coming directly out of the north, that's energy. It's coming into this system. And with this in the neutral phase, what typically happens is that energy needs to transfer downstream. And 92, probably 95% of the time, what you're going to see in the southeast quadrant of this trough is a low pressure form. And when you get a closed low positioned over the Tennessee Valley, what's going to happen is a lot of that Gulf moisture and warm air is going to wrap around counterclockwise around that low pressure system. And the source region being the Gulf of Mexico, this explains why we have that warm air and moisture overrunning the cold air in the Tennessee Valley and Ohio Valley. But again, a week out, it's hard for the models to pick up on something over the Pacific Ocean. And what's really interesting about all of this is that we had these planes, these hurricane hunters more or less, move over the Pacific Ocean to check out this short wave that's now moved over California. And what they're able to pick up on and hopefully be added to these models in the future is the data within that short wave. And the issue has always been that whenever we have systems over the Pacific or over open water, we don't have radio sound data that we can just send into the clouds. Our second best method really is to fly into them and get data that way. Okay, so we were just talking about the ridging in the last slide. So if you can imagine the warm air overrunning the mid-Atlantic in this region. And what's strange about it all is that at the surface, temperatures are actually in the teens Sunday morning. And they will warm at the surface, but it won't be enough in the state of Virginia, especially as you move towards the mountains where the air will be more stubborn. And all indications are that in North Carolina even, through much of the Piedmont, it's going to stay below freezing throughout the duration of the event. Now as we move further off to the west into western Kentucky, western Tennessee, northern Arkansas, Oklahoma, and northern Texas, All of this precipitation Sunday morning will either be in the form of snow or changing back to snow as we get into Sunday afternoon. And what the GFS is showing in contrast to the European model is that there's going to be more wraparound moisture in the system, as if the low pressure system does not transition fully off the coast, that there is some form of that low over the Tennessee Valley, bringing in more moisture on the back side of it. So we could see additional accumulation of snow in this region if that were to pan out that way. So a couple of other things too. We can see the warm surge of air into southern Georgia and also southern Alabama. Again, temperatures could reach 70 degrees there. And probably along this temperature gradient, there could be thunderstorm activity. So over central Alabama into North Georgia, it'd be kind of strange to see freezing rain and then lightning in the distance in parts of Georgia. I guess that is possible during the day Sunday. And then finally, off to the north and west, there is extreme cold air that's surging back in to the Midwest and eventually into the southern plains and the southeast as we get into the day Tuesday. Again, these locations that are picking up snow and ice, and hopefully these places that are picking up freezing rain do not get this cold, but we could see single digits later this week in parts of Arkansas and even Texas and Louisiana. So again, dangerous conditions possible for these folks moving forward. One thing I'm going to try to do a decent job of here is to talk about this cross-section over the mid-Atlantic to show you cold air damming and how it's really thick as you get towards the mountains, the cold air dome, and then it just disappears towards the coast. So to the best of our ability, let's quickly take a look at that. And I want to kind of turn your attention to the upper right-hand corner here. So yeah, this image here in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice that we have 2 points, A to B. And when you're looking at A, that's kind of like Roanoke, Virginia. And then when you see B off to the right, that's in the Atlantic Ocean itself. And what it doesn't do a great job of here, if you were to look at this entire map here and look at the very bottom here at the surface, that does represent the surface. So you can kind of see the slope of the land here. And to the best of its ability, it's trying to show you how it's decreasing in elevation from west to east. The last thing I want to show you here, and again, this is a very complicated map, is that there's a certain blue line representing the freezing temperatures aloft. So I'm going to circle this line here that represents the freezing temperatures near the surface. And when we get out here to a place like Chesapeake, Virginia, again, I'm going to kind of draw a red box here. You notice that there's no blue line there. And what that means is that you would have to go up really high in the atmosphere to actually get cold enough for any frozen precipitation. There's no cold air really at the surface there. And just to show you where that would be, it would be somewhere right in here. I'm going to circle it on that map in the upper right-hand corner. That Chesapeake area or eastern shore of Virginia would be too warm at the surface here for frozen precipitation. But as we track, let's say, further inland, I'm going to draw on that map again just further to the south and to the west here. I'll draw another red box more or less. So hopefully you can see that here at the bottom of the screen what I'm doing. So with my red pointer, I'm drawing another box. In that location, it would be cold enough for freezing rain. And that would correspond with maybe Richmond, Virginia here. And that would correspond with the pink that you're seeing on the map in that upper right-hand corner. Now, tracking further west still, one thing you'll notice is that this blue is actually pretty thick. So I'm going to kind of circle it here. It's on the order of maybe 3 to as much as 5,000 feet thick, according to what we're seeing here on the map. And once you approach a thickness of about 5,000 feet, it's almost a sure thing you're going to see sleet in your region. And for many people across central Virginia, they're going to be very fortunate in the sense that instead of freezing rain likely sleet in this area instead. So I want to look at snowfall totals here, starting in the plains and then kind of moving to the east with time. We can see here over the Great Plains we have the snowfall in a large area of maybe 6 to 12 inches here as we look at this map to the right. And then another area that's a bit thinner, right? That's about 12 to 16 inches in pink. So I'll kind of quickly circle this here so you can see that. So the heaviest snowfall right now in the European model is over northern Arkansas, extending into western Kentucky, maybe even northwestern West Virginia, at least in this part of the country. And what's going to happen is on the south side of this, we're going to likely have an area of sleet over parts of Texas, parts of Arkansas and Tennessee. And then just to the south of that even, there's going to be freezing rain mixing in. And where we have all freezing rain, and there's going to be an area that does receive that, you could see upwards of a half an inch to an inch of freezing rain during the duration of this event. The most likely locations I've pinpointed in that map to the right. So you can see where I've pinpointed the areas I think are going to receive close to an inch of freezing rain according to the current model trends. And I believe over southern Arkansas, maybe up into central Arkansas, and also extending back into, let's say, eastern portions of Texas, maybe over northern portions of Mississippi and western portions of Tennessee. But as we get into Tennessee, I believe there's going to be more sleet mixing in just because of that cold dome of air. I believe it's going to be thicker than what the models are showing. And the same thing is true for areas into northern Arkansas. I believe we're going to see a lot of snow there, but then also when it transitions to another frozen precipitation form, I see it being sleet rather than freezing rain. And the other thing I want to show too is that there is the possibility of thunderstorm activity as we get into Alabama, Georgia, and maybe even parts of Mississippi, with that warm air moving northward from the Gulf of Mexico, again associated with the movement of that developing low pressure system over Tennessee. So what happens when we get into the mid-Atlantic? There's a lot more uncertainty in the models from what we're seeing in the mid-Atlantic. The trend overwhelmingly has been to push the snow further to the north with time. And what we're seeing currently, and this is as of the 12Z run Wednesday, we can see the area of heaviest snow again over northern portions of Kentucky, northern portions of West Virginia, into Maryland, and even northern Virginia, right? I think in northern Virginia, anywhere from Stanton to, let's say, Winchester along I-81, I think that could be a real problem spot where you could see, again, heavy snowfall close to a foot, but then you also see sleet and maybe even a period of freezing rain at the end. What I think is going to happen that's not necessarily showing up in the models is that there could be an area of 10 to maybe 14 inches of snowfall. Again, hopefully you can see this in the figure to the right, that extends into eastern Pennsylvania, like Scranton. And then also further north, let's say into New York, maybe the Capital District near Albany, we could see a foot of snow there. And then further still to, let's say, Hartford, Connecticut, and even Boston. I wouldn't be surprised if Boston receives 10 to maybe even 12 inches of snow from this event. This is something that could get even stronger with time, this low pressure system off the Atlantic coast. It's going to really be a transfer of power from that system that we're seeing in Tennessee to the one developing off the Delmarva Peninsula. And depending on how well that transition goes and the interplay with the high pressure system over Maine or southern Canada, that's going to determine more or less how much precipitation we get off the Atlantic, going back into the Northeast and delivering that heavy snowfall. One thing that seems certain is that we will have a long duration of light to moderate snowfall, and I think these estimates of 6 to 12 inches that we're seeing in blue here extend through Ohio, much of upstate New York, into much of the Northeast. I think that's totally feasible. And these higher amounts that I'm showing here is that, yeah, we could see some 14-inch amounts. We could see some 12-inch amounts into northern New Jersey. The big cities like Philadelphia, New York City, Hartford, Connecticut, Providence, Rhode Island, even Boston, Massachusetts. We could see a foot of snow throughout the Northeast along the I-95 corridor. Also over Virginia, over Richmond to, let's say, Roanoke, that area. I think that's going to be mostly sleet for the event. May end up with 3 to 6 inches of mess once the system is exiting the northeast. Further south still, over places like Danville, maybe to South Hill and southern Virginia, you could get into mostly freezing rain, especially if this system tracks further to the north. However, I think northern North Carolina, the Piedmont area, into western North Carolina, places like Asheville, perhaps even as far north as Boone, North Carolina, that entire region could easily pick up half an inch to an inch of freezing rain. And it could be a very dangerous situation where people are without power for a week, maybe even 2 weeks, depending on the extent of this ice storm. If we go back and look at this map in particular, you can see the daytime highs here on Sunday in the single digits over the Central Plains. And back further still, these temperatures 20 degrees below zero. And there's some indications that this cold air is going to have a lot of success getting into the southern plains, into areas of the southeast. I was seeing temperatures below zero in Virginia as we get into Tuesday morning. The same thing true over portions of Oklahoma and Arkansas during the day Monday. We could see temperatures drop below zero there as well. So all indications are that these areas that are receiving snow, sleet, and freezing rain are going to experience very cold temperatures after the event is done. The hope is that instead of freezing rain, we do receive mainly sleet over these areas, and hopefully that cold dome of air limits the area that's impacted by this freezing rain. But that remains to be seen, and I think over the next couple of days, tuning into live stream, tuning into these people that are posting videos online, I think that'd be helpful. A lot of them have these storm chasers out that respond to them, and they tell you what the roadways are like. So yeah, if you have the internet reception and you have the means to look at online before going and traveling and making those necessary preparations before the storm, and if you're someone that has a generator, right, that just needs a bit of maintenance, or a wood stove that, yeah, you can get firewood for before this event, this is something that is the real deal. This is something that could be a danger. And I just want to remind you that, again, over the south, typically you get a storm like this, next day it's above freezing. The big difference between this one and other events is that it's going to get cold and possibly stay cold for days. I guess the big takeaway is that we want everybody to be safe moving forward. And the last thing I want to mention to you guys is that, yeah, I'm going to be doing a live stream, my first live stream on Sunday, and I plan to cover whatever's left of the storm, so from Texas to Maine. I think this is going to be a day where we can see, okay, this is what happened in eastern Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee. We'll have a good idea, I hope, of what the ice damage is in those areas. We'll take a look at Texas to Maine, and we'll look at different cameras. We'll get an idea about model guidance, if anything has changed at that point. And maybe we can bring in some history as well and compare it to past storms. And of course, anyone that's involved with the live stream and commenting, I can take suggestions and see if we can do something a little bit different maybe than what you see on other channels. But I hope you enjoyed the video today. I'll see you Sunday.